So welcome. I appreciate all of your time this morning. This is another one of our monthly events that we put on for our clients and friends and anybody who wants to know a little bit more about what we do. It's good for us to share a little bit about our process and how we think, and we do it in an attempt to find like-minded clients, because we know that if we can sit down with somebody and have a conversation about the state of global affairs and have a conversation that resonates, then we've identified someone we can potentially do some business with longer term. So a little bit about Cush Capital. We're an advisory firm registered in the state of Kansas. We do business with individuals and corporations and trusts and a couple other advisory firms. And we market ourselves based on better research. We really have a passion for digging into the SEC filings and talking to management teams and trying to uncover those hidden gems that collectively make for a better portfolio. And we've been successful at doing that, and that's evidenced by a real nice article that was written up on our firm in the Kansas City Business Journal earlier this year after we were awarded a 4-star Morningstar rating. So that's a big feather in our cap that we're proud of, and we have that article over here on the table. We practice golden rule investing, which is just another way of saying that we're fully invested alongside of our clients. That doesn't sound like a very big deal, but it's a rarity for investment advisors to be able to say that, so I always make a special point to mention it. We practice a biblically responsible approach, and we are certified Catholic practitioners, which does not make us the moral authority on anything, but it's our effort to bring what we do on Sunday into the rest of our daily work week, just to simply live with a greater sense of integrity. And then, like I mentioned, we put these events on to identify like-minded investors and to share our viewpoint. So a couple of slides that we share every month, and we share these slides because they influence what we do on a daily basis more so than anything else, and that's debt. This is a slide of the debt outstanding in the United States by all sectors, mortgage, consumer, federal, state, local. It now exceeds over 50 trillion, and when you add Social Security and Medicare on top of this, we are in excess of $100 trillion in debt. That number's too big to really wrap your head around, so we have this next slide, which shows total government expenditures as a percent of GDP. And we call this the path to socialism, because as you continue to amass debt, there's nothing hidden about what's going to happen to the United States economy. Eventually, the interest payments on that debt dwarf our economy. This won't happen. This simply extrapolates the path that we're on. But to correct that path, we either have to lower spending, raise taxes, or stealthily increase the money supply so we can pay off these debts with the dollars that are of lesser and lesser value. And increasingly, we feel like that's going to be a part of, if not the majority of the solution. Okay, so this slide shows the stock market of the 80s and 90s during a period of time when we are accruing a lot of this debt. This acts as steroids for the economy, so to speak. In the last 10 years, we've seen something much more volatile, and this is the volatility that we expect to continue over the course of the next 4 to 6 to 8 years. This has been referred to as a muddle-through market, the new normal, a range-bound market. Ultimately, this will be a stock picker's market, and a market where firms like Cush Capital should really excel. So the topic of today's discussion is the euro and you. And this is the topic of the nightly news at least 3 times a week for the last 3 months or so. So I'm sure you're all very familiar with the headlines that it has been garnering, but what does it really mean for our portfolios? That's what we want to talk about today. Europe faces the same problem that we face in the United States, which is debt. And this chart doesn't show the debt of the European Union. It shows the debt on a global basis. So you can see here that debt has been increasing at 11% per year since 2002. Global debt over that time has more than doubled from 84 trillion to 194 trillion. The purple line on this graph shows the debt to GDP ratio. you can see there in 2009 the debt to GDP ratio was nearly 340%. That level is historically only seen during war times. This is the largest peacetime accumulation of debt that the globe has ever known. And this chart, I want to give credit to the maker of this chart. This chart comes from Kyle Bass of Heyman Advisors. A big part of our job is to survey the landscape on a daily basis and actively go out and seek the opinions of other thought leaders that we hold in high esteem. And increasingly, Kyle Bass is on the top of that list. So several of these charts will be from him. So here's the chart that shows Europe specifically. And like the chart that I showed of the United States, Europe has the same challenges. The red bar here shows on-balance sheet debt inside of the European Union. The gray bar shows that those same on-balance sheet debts plus entitlements. So in the United States, that would be Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. In Germany, France, and Spain, the gray bar would be their equivalents. Now, there's a silver lining to the European Union and the situation that they have themselves in, which is evidenced by the second gray bar from the right. You can see there that the European Union, on the whole, has total net government liabilities equate to 434% of GDP, which is much better than the United States. And what that says to us is that there's a light at the end of this tunnel. We can get to a place where Europe is better off than the United States. Now, getting from A to B, our working thesis on getting there is that it's going to be a painful ride. But this chart illustrates the point that there is a solution to this problem.
I don't understand that point. How does it say that this is a solution?
I like the way you think, Claude. How about I rephrase and say that if there's a solution for the United States, then by extension there's a solution for Europe. Because you could very well indeed argue that there's no solution for us either. But we're not quite that pessimistic just yet. So I put together a little timeline of how this has all unfolded since January of 2010. And I won't read this to you word for word, but I will point out that in March of 2010, the Eurozone and the IMF agreed to a safety net of 22 billion for Greece. In April of 2010, they upped it to 30 billion euros. In May of 2010, the IMF and the Eurozone members agreed to a 110 billion euro bailout package for Greece. In May of 2010, they also put together the EFSF, the European Financial Stability Facility, which was a 750 billion euro package. In November of 2010, they bailed out Ireland, 85 billion. In May of 2010, they bailed out Portugal, 75 billion. In July of 2011, they bailed out Greece a second time, 109 billion. And then most recently, just last week, December 9, 2011, the European Union leaders came together and agreed in principle to reset the maximum budget deficit at 3%. So the point that we're trying to make with these two slides is that 6, 7, 8 times now, the European Union leaders have gotten together in the same room for an emergency series of overnight meetings and came out and announced quote-unquote definitive solutions to the problem. So, and the fact of the matter has been that each time they have been some can-kicking mechanism that has failed to address the root of the problem. And indeed, even in the latest agreement, what we have is a solution in principle that has to be passed unanimously through 17 different parliaments. We view that as a problem. In order to hold each sovereign to the 3% budget deficit, they've agreed that each sovereign will pass through their parliament a bill that gives power to Brussels and effectively cedes control over their own individual budgets to a panel of technocrats. Let's see, and is subsequently to be enforced by sanctions that have not yet been agreed upon. So we view this whole event last week as lacking in substance, and Moody's agrees with us because yesterday they announced that they were putting the entire Eurozone on credit watch, which sent the markets down again. Okay, so this chart illustrates the measures that have been put in effect to date by the central banks around the world. So you have the Federal Reserve, the ECB, the Bank of Japan, have all been stimulating their economies, and when they do so, they increase the size of their balance sheet by buying market debt and injecting dollars into the economy. This is how central banks print money. This is the mechanism that they use to get the new dollars into the economy. You can see there that there was a huge stimulus in 2008. 2009, 2010, not so much. And then in 2011, you saw most of the effects of the QE2 federal stimulus program. This chart comes from the Financial Times, and the data to the right of the vertical bar there is the projection by the Financial Times of the stimulus measures that will be necessary as $10.5 trillion of sovereign debt renews next year. The globe will have to finance all of this debt next year. And in order to do so, the Financial Times expects central banks around the world to have to dramatically increase their stimulus programs. All of this in an effort to keep interest rates low. And I'll show you here in a minute what happens when interest rates start to rise. It dramatically increases the likelihood of sovereign default. This slide shows the marginal benefit of new credit pumped into an economy. So the last slide showed the amount of credit that central banks around the world had been flooding our markets with. This slide shows the benefit of those dollars. So the bar to the far left shows that between 1947 and 1952, each additional dollar of debt we issued to stimulate our economy added $4.61 to GDP. This has markedly declined over the last 6 decades. And since in 2001 to 2010, each dollar's worth of debt that we pumped into our economy grew GDP by 0.08 cents. And I wanted to share another quote here. The Bank of International Settlements recently published a paper entitled "The Real Effects of Debt," which notes increasing evidence that debt levels have reached the point of retarding growth and that additional debt will place additional downward pressure on the economy. The paper also notes the enormous impact that aging populations will have on countries throughout the world. The spending on the 2008 financial crisis, which was in the trillions of dollars, is dwarfed by the projected costs of caring for aging populations. On average, aging populations will cost the advanced G20 countries 14 times more than the financial crisis. So we're simply running out of runway to finance the additional needs of our society with increases in additional debt, and the effectiveness of that debt is marginal at best. So where does this leave us? This leaves us with heightened default risk, and that's the message of this slide. It shows defaults from Mexico in 1827 to most recently Argentina in 2001, and the ratio of debt to revenues of each of these sovereigns at different points in time. And you can see here that relative to the defaults of the last 200 years, Greece, Spain, Japan, and even the United States are clearly inside of the risk zone here. This chart was This chart highlights a ratio that Carmen Reinhart and Ken Rogoff highlight in their book called This Time It's Different, where they profile financial crises from around the world, not just covering 200 years, but they look back at a period of 800 years. And what they find is that anytime this ratio starts to creep up over 4.2 times, it signals the end of the sovereign. And there's a couple different ways sovereigns can default. They can simply refuse to pay their debt. They can, in the case of an ECB country like Greece or Portugal or Ireland, they could leave the euro, go back to the drachma or the lira or their legacy currencies. Or in the case of the United States, what's much more likely is that since we own a printing press, we can simply hyperinflate away our currency and our debt. So right now the United States sits at about 4 times debt to revenues, which is right at that line where Ken Reinhart and Carmen Rogoff show, by looking back over 800 years, that is a highly dangerous place to be.
Vern, in these debt to revenues, are they including entitlements?
No.
So if you included entitlements, wouldn't ours be much higher relative to the prior ones?
Much, yeah. They took a look at that in their book, and if memory serves, those entitlement programs are the first for governments to basically default on. So theoretically, we could wipe those out with lesser consequences to the global financial markets. But great point. It only serves to illustrate the conundrum that we're in with all this debt. So these next 2 slides address those debt levels in another way. So this slide looks at sovereign debt to GDP, and this is another slide from Kyle Bass of Hayman Capital Advisors, and he says here that a cursory look at sovereign leverage would tell you that most countries are less than 1 times levered to their GDP, which is high, but not default high historically. Now let's look at those same debt levels plus the debt embedded inside of the banking system. Because as we saw in the United States, that when the banking system goes bust, sovereigns have to step up and support those banking systems. At least that was the message we got from Ben Bernanke et al. In 2008 when they told the Congress and the public that if we don't inject $750 billion plus into our banking system, we're going to have another Great Depression. So we've recapitalized our banks. This chart shows that Europe and others have not, and could similarly have a need in the future to do so if their banking system gets in trouble. So you have Ireland, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and France on the far left there. You can see that the United States is, we're much better off. Where are we here?
6th from the right.
6th from the right. So on a relative basis, we look much stronger and have a much less risk of systemic banking crises. Okay. Bear with me a minute here. So what happened? This chart shows the yield on Italian 10-year debt over the last year. You can see in January of 2011, the Italians were paying less than 5% on their debt. The crisis started in July when yields on Italian debt started to creep up from 5 to 6 to 7, over 7% in November, and have since backed off a little bit with this latest agreement. And I want to make the point with this slide, just how dangerous that it can be when sovereign debt creeps up from 5 to 6 to 7%. You can see Italy there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 from the left. 10% of their revenues that the government takes in go to pay their interest expense. So when interest expense doubles, 20% of their revenues are now going to pay interest expense. If yields on Italian debt double, if they go from 5 to 10% or 5 to 8% like they did, they increased by 60% already. That takes the revenues that, the tax revenues that Italy brings in from 10% of their economy to 16% of their economy. They have to cut the other side of their budget in order to balance, which would be their expenditures. They would have to cut those by 6% just for their budget to balance. Now, you remember how much trouble we had cutting $150 billion out of a $14 trillion economy earlier this year. It caused our debt to get downgraded, and it caused the 20% fall in the markets. Imagine what's going to happen when Italy has to cut 6% out of their budgetary expenses. You will see rioting, civil unrest, major consequences in the markets. This is the consequences of this could be severe if it's not addressed inside of the European Union.
We're in higher interest rates are driven by derating events.
That's a big part of it. That's a big part of it. And the rating agencies now are playing a game where they're trying to be more proactive about downgrading these companies in advance because they all got burned in the wake of the subprime debt debacle and accused of basically sitting on their hands and insider dealing. So now they're trying to be much more proactive about it, and that creates a problem for some of these sovereigns because they're trying to get their houses in order so that they can borrow money to support their economies as they are now. If interest rates go up, it increases the likelihood that they'll go into recession. If they go into recession, then the tax revenues that they're able to generate are less than what they otherwise would have been, and the cycle continues.
So it seems like an escalating cycle.
It is an escalating cycle. So what do we do about it, or what's the answer to this problem that we're in? A cheerful conclusion here that I took out of the Economist yesterday. They said the crisis in Europe looks eerily similar to the financial turmoil of the late 1920s and early 1930s, in which economies fell like dominoes under the pressure from austerity, tight money, and the lack of a lender of last resort. There are, in short, future lessons to be learned. That was from last Friday's Economist. So our working theory here is that there is a solution to this problem, and that was evidenced by the chart we showed earlier, where the EU is in a relatively better position than we are in the United States. We can get our budgets under control, and so can Europe. It will look something more like the United States of Europe, and that means fiscal integration and the European Central Bank as the lender of last resort. So you've probably heard the term Eurobonds bantered around, and that means that the European Central Bank will be granted the authority to print money, print Eurobonds, and finance the deficits of some of the peripheral countries. And it looks like that's going to be tied in with some greater fiscal integration. The opinion polls that we watch in Europe don't support this solution, actually far from it. This is the solution that works for a global economy. Europe doesn't want it because, understandably, it represents a very large wealth transfer from the solvent countries like Germany and Norway, Sweden, France to some degree, to the peripheral countries of Greece, Ireland, Portugal, Spain. They don't want to have to bail them out. So we think that politicians and political decisions ultimately will navigate to the least painful solution, so that the pain of not taking action has to be greater than the pain of taking action. And that will be manifested in the stock market, very much so like it was manifested in the U.S. markets in 2008, where we saw a market decline somewhere in the neighborhood of 40% before the politicians had the cover that they needed to inject $750 billion into the economy and basically bail out some of Wall Street's biggest fat cats. So the German stock market is off about 16% from its peak earlier this year. So there's clearly not enough pain there yet to sway massive public opinion. One thing that we're certain of is that Europe can't go into a severe recession without having an effect on the U.S. markets. So we have our portfolio positioned today about as conservative as we ever have, and we do that using securities like RWM, which is an exchange-traded fund that's inversely linked to the markets, so that when the markets go down, RWM goes up and serves as portfolio insurance, if you will. We hold a little bit extra cash, we hold some gold, and then we hold the basic necessities like utilities, food, oil, gas, medicine. This is an atypical event for us. I'm usually up here talking about a specific security that we own and how it fits into our portfolio and why, and really taking a deeper dive into what we actually hold. But the euro has been consuming so much of our time lately that we felt like it was worthwhile to devote an entire event to it. So we wanted to share our thoughts. I'm happy to take questions. We always ask that you help us spread the word for these types of events. If you know somebody else that might be interested, please reach out and invite them. Dennis had a great idea last week. He said we ought to open this up a little bit more to our clients and friends so they can talk to one another and get to know each other. So we thought that we'd just kind of open the floor open to our clients for questions. If you want to introduce yourself and tell a little bit about what you do and how you got here, we'd welcome that. So.
The above average odds investing club, what's that?
So that is an investing club that it wouldn't be accurate to say we run it. It'd be more accurate to say we just host it. On a monthly basis, we invite friends and clients and whoever has an interest in investing in to eat a little barbecue and talk about an investing idea, and we just roundtable a particular investment theme for the month. Last month we talked about business development companies, and one specifically. And then everybody brings an idea, and from those ideas we select the one that we like the best, and that's the deeper dive that we go into the following month. So
Do you send out notices about that?
we do, yeah. I'd be happy to put you on the list.
Yeah.
So.
You already talked about euros and the American dollar, US dollars. How about China? How would they fit in some of these? There's a lot of investments over there.
Gosh, that's a whole nother event that I didn't prepare for. We watch China very closely. We talked about China earlier this year, and some of the viewpoints that are held by Jim Chanos and others about the real estate bubble that's developing in China. Right now, our theory on China is that they have too much going on inside of their own economy to reasonably have an impact on the euro. They've announced publicly a willingness to support the European Financial Stability Facility and other mechanisms that are designed to support the debt of Greece and Portugal and Ireland and others. I feel like that's probably more lip service than real action, but that can have an effect on markets, so I know it's welcome by the EU. Yeah, there's a lot going on inside China.
So I think we use foreign trade as, as foreign policy leverage as well. Do you see any reversal of that? I mean, our trade with China is really driven by probably military strategies and anything else, and other countries.
A lot of it. China's been stimulating their economy for over a decade now, and you'll hear a lot of economists tell you that that a big part of the reason why we're in the situation that we're in now has to do with the savings glut that came out of China. As China stimulates their economy and as a net exporter, it's natural for them to have this huge glut of savings, which, given their risk aversion, has helped to keep global interest rates low for over a decade now, and made it easier for sovereigns like Greece Italy and the United States even to build up these excesses that manifest in bubbles around the world. So they are being more diligent now about managing their currency. So
If we had a policy change where we decided to manufacture more of our own products, would that be a solution in any way?
we may not need a policy change to make that happen. You're seeing a lot of that happen naturally as a couple of different reasons for it. The Chinese yuan has gradually been appreciating against the US dollar, which makes it more affordable for companies in the United States to manufacture in the United States. And then as the cost of energy increases, that it also makes it much more affordable to manufacture in the United States. So the natural laws of economics are helping to aid that, but policy changes might be another alternative.
You know, I think you touched on this a little bit, Vern, but I'm not the brightest bulb in the tree, and I'm not the biggest. The reason I'm here is I'm trying to learn about the whole investment thing. But I'd like, just as far as the group goes, I'd like, I see it as none of this, no matter how logical things are nowadays, or how logical the solution is, as long as we're governed by people that worry more about votes than they do about what really is the best solution, we're in trouble. I don't want to oversimplify it, but I can't imagine that there aren't some people in Washington that really know what we need to do. You talked about the pain kind of a thing where, I almost believe we're going to have to completely, totally tank before people wake up and realize that they need to get choked a little bit right now and make some really tough decisions to get out of this, because I hear about all kinds of solutions that make sense, but everybody's worried. Egos and votes and getting reelected seems to be the driver, not really what's in the best interest of the country. So am I like out of left field on that? Or?
No, we talk about
vote
that.
for,
We talk about that every day.
Yeah, but
we vote for people that tell us lies and about each other and stuff like that. That's what we encourage.
yeah, and
So
they all,
if that's what you're going to vote for, then that's what you're going to get.
but they all do it.
Well, yeah,
I
the
think
reason they all do
politicians
that is
are
because
like-
we have consistently voted for that.
They're like
That's right.
bottom
So
feeders.
that's why they all do it.
They only do what we tell them to do. We always blame Washington. All they're doing is answering the phone, I think it's a consensus of Americans to follow the path we're on, not Washington. That's a bailout, in my opinion.
But it's
We're not a concerned and informed voting populace.
No, we're not. No, and what's worse yet, it seems like this last generation or two of entitlement-driven people, that it's if the people that believe they're entitled to something ever exceed those of us that want to work for something, we're in trouble. And what's crazy about it is it can't possibly work because there's going to be too few people making money to pay these yahoos, right?
Recognize that pretty
So-
much everybody in our society feels entitled. It's not just the less affluent. How many affluent people feel that they're entitled to these huge incomes and all these country club memberships and all of that stuff, and they feel like they've contributed all this stuff, when really what they're doing is riding the coattails of people that came before them and set stuff up. So part of the problem on our entitlements is that the wealthy people felt very entitled, and the trickle down didn't work because people at the top grabbed for themselves instead of trickling down. So
Yeah. Well, there you get into ideology, and I couldn't disagree with you more on that. But I believe that I don't believe Steve Jobs felt like he was entitled. I think I think there is some of that, but our problem is.
Well, let's talk about Social Security. I think when they actually tried, I'm 45 years old. I kept saying I'm never going to see Social Security, but the more I think about it, I probably will, because this in 20 years they'll still be kicking this down the road. Because who's going to actually say we're going to cut off Social Security at a certain age or whatever? I don't know. Maybe we physically have to at some point, but it seems like there's no incentive to have any politician, back to what you were saying, to actually make the hard decisions. Because I ask him every day, when are, like this RWM, we've had this trade on for a while, like when can we start slimming that down? Or it's just so negative. But he's like, well, until the politicians in Washington and really the world start changing their philosophies. This chart on on page 7 about the marginal debt, that's amazing. So since 1953, basically, every incremental dollar of debt that we take on only adds a certain amount. How do they keep with the promulgating this? We're going to bail you out. Let's buy some more debt and kick this down the road when it's getting worse and worse and worse. I don't know. I'm floored. I had never seen that chart before. That's amazing.
Well, do you know that movie on HBO? I was curious if anybody else watched it and how much of it's based on fact, but Too Big to Fail. I thought it was a great movie, and really for people that didn't really understand the whole mortgage-backed securities thing, I thought they did a pretty good job of educating a little bit. How much, I mean, is that what actually, from you guys are professionals in this business, I mean, is that true? Is that pretty much what started all this?
I think I've seen that movie. If my memory serves right, there were 2 on HBO, and I'm not sure.
Yeah, it was all about, some of the actors.
It's based on the Andrew Ross Sorkin book.
Yeah.
Lehman Brothers and how they were kind of left out there.
I know that movie was very well received. Andrew Ross Sorkin won several awards for his journalism and researching all of that. He's excellent. So I'd want to tell you that it was very well done.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
I'm sorry.
no, please.
Over the last 4 years, I mean, we have turned ourselves from a self-sustaining economy, or at least appears that way. And, you know, all of the global leaders have decided to integrate all economies. And to me, part of that was driven because the world wars and a lot of those things. We became so interdependent on one another from an economic viewpoint that we can no longer get into huge conflicts like we used to. So that's a good thing. But this is the result of that. To me, we no longer can act by ourselves. We depend on everybody else to act with us. And it's just so intertwined, it's just hard to get out of. And I think that could be a policy change. I still think that if we pulled our economies back to ourselves, that would be some kind of a solution. We don't buy all our oil from the Middle East anymore, for example. Those are the shift changes in policies that could make a difference. I don't know whether Washington's committed to doing that.
I don't know whether Washington's
really going to last
committed to do that either. One thing that we see that exacerbates that problem a little bit is that politicians as a group have this innate sense of wanting to tamp down volatility. So the natural swings that you see in the business cycle, when you try to smooth those out, it allows for the gradual growing of excesses in the economy. I've seen the metaphor of a pile of sand used many times to describe the effects that this can have. Each additional grain of sand might have little effect on the pile, but the millionth grain or the 2 millionth grain can cause a collapse of the whole system. And those are the types of excesses that we build up when politicians seek to continually limit the pain that we feel in the economy. So what might be a typical business swing or a recession that lasts for 18 months now lasts 36 months or 4 years.
But the whole blame game, like the wealthiest in the country, you know, are to blame or can solve the problem, or it's all these selfish people, or it's like, it's just ridiculous. I mean, if you took, again, I'm not an investment person, but if you took, well, I can get, if you took all the money Bill Gates and Jobs $7 billion or whatever that his worth, and if you took the 100 wealthiest people in the world, you took all their money and you threw it at dead, it'd still be like pissing on a towering inferno. It wouldn't make any difference at all.
Right.
So it's not, that's not in of itself isn't the solution. So I just don't, I got maybe, you know, my ignorance is the reason I guess I sit around just shaking my head up. And I'm like, what, how can this be so, it's really not that complex, is it?
Well, there's no easy solution other than sacrifice. A lot of people are going to have to deal with less than what they're used to dealing with, and that's painful, and it's a very hard environment to get yourself elected in. And
That's because what you said earlier, the uninformed voters, I mean, they don't have any idea what the hell they're even voting for most of the time.
Well, I would say that going forward, you know, the idea of everybody having a two-story home with a three-car garage and 4 cars at your house is eventually not gonna be affordable. So, you know, those are the things that are gonna happen. All of the lovely things that we enjoy today, we're probably gonna have less of.
Well, based on those mortgage-backed securities, that was part of the problem right there.
Mm-hmm.
Things not being affordable and trying to give everyone stuff that they haven't earned or deserved.
You see apartments being built everywhere, you know, that's where young people evidently are living. I would guess, somebody's living there.
Oh, and I read a great article about the baby boomers the other day. Actually, I posted it on LinkedIn. The kids, the young kids, the 20-something kids, are blaming all of us old guys because we won't retire and get the hell out of the way so they can make money. That'd be incredible. I put on LinkedIn, I said, go boomers.
I have a question about United Kingdom, and they're opting out apparently of all this, whether that sets them up for success or failure, or whether they're just don't believe it and say.
yeah, I don't know yet. It looks to me like the Germans and the French were prepared for that to happen. They did a pretty good job of successfully rallying the other Euro states to get them to agree to this package of budget controls and greater fiscal integration. So they're going to try to do it without the United Kingdom, and I don't know that the market's response would have been that much greater if the United Kingdom was on board. So they're taking some protectionist measures to benefit their own financial industry in London, and that's understandable. I guess you wouldn't expect them to behave any other way. So.
You mean them opting out?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, the other undertow in some of the European economies is there's just so much immigration that all of those countries have seen in the last 25, 30 years, and I think eventually that turns into a tidal. And you can go to the Netherlands and they have like a 25% Muslim population. That's a lot different than it was 30 years ago. And those are all working class, and a lot of them, well, they're like some of the inner city Hispanics that we have here. They're not really sustaining anything. They're just a low wage group.
So, yeah, the same problem that we have here in the United States with entitlements, Medicare, and Social Security.
Yeah, but at least minimum wage is going to be increased. Everybody's broke, no one has any money. Let's go ahead and raise minimum wage. Vote. Vote for me.
So, Mike, would you like to